So with that, I get to introduce somebody really cool, an icon, as it were. And I won't read through Peter's whole resume, but he has been a faculty member at Georgetown Law School since 1982. He's served in all three branches of the federal government. He worked for Robert Kennedy. If you ever get a chance, Google his interview with Bill Moyers, where they talk about their youth when they, in the 60s, I think it was the 60s, went down to the South with Robert Kennedy and saw for themselves the condition of people living in poverty and brought that to the fore. He was an issues director for Senator Edward Kennedy, and he has just written a new book, So Rich and So Poor, Why It Is So Hard to End Poverty in America. And to get a sense of him, rather than read anymore, I just want to read a brief quote. I bought the book this weekend, and I was on my Kindle. And in Professor Edelman's words, America and poverty are words that should not appear in the same sentence. We are the wealthiest country in the world. That we should have poverty at all is oxymoronic. That we have the highest child poverty rate in the industrial world is downright shameful. I'm pleased to introduce Peter Edelman.
Well, thank you so much, Senator, and thank you to Grace and California Endowment for inviting me. It's absolutely marvelous to be a part of this conference. How often do I get to hear from my wife? That's a challenge, though, you know. But all of the speakers, so wonderful. You, with all of the travails in California over the recent and other years, and all the things that there are to do, you have such wonderful leadership here in your city and in your state. It's just so terrific to be here. I do want to add, just to show you I was really listening to my wife, a fourth place for you to go when you go to Washington, right? You remember this morning, all you, okay. Dr. King, yeah, Nelson Mandela, Franklin Roosevelt. Every day when I go down, I do everything she tells me to, and I would do it anyway, but I also think about FDR, because if you haven't seen the wonderful kind of open set of rooms that there are, the open air without a roof rooms, it's totally wonderful and inspiring. And so one of the things that's etched in stone there, which adds to my hope and optimism, is that it is etched in stone. It is not going to go away. He said in his second inaugural address, the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. So add that to your list of places to go. Now, there's a lot of knowledge in this room, and the topic that we negotiated is that we can't end child poverty without public policy. Everybody knows that. So, plus, everybody here knows that we can't end child poverty without private action, without civic responsibility, that we need the business community, labor, faith, foundations, and especially the personal responsibility that all of us have to take for ourselves and our children. So if we know all of that, why am I here to talk to you about the need for public policy? Certainly not to convince you. I'm here because too many people in our country, too many people, not just elected officials, but too many elected officials as well, think that the reason we have 46 million people in this country living in poverty, the reason is that our public policies, they think, have been a massive failure. Well, I know that with the new, Senator, where are you now? The new EPIC caucus in the legislature, anyway, that will bring us along. But more seriously, we don't have a challenge just to educate the politicians. It is a challenge for all of us to participate in educating all of our people, especially those who don't get it. there's too many people, and you see them, you talk to them, you hear them, think that this is all because of a gigantic failure of personal responsibility. They think that the real answer is to do nothing, is to spend no tax dollars. Yes, volunteerism, as Karen Bass said. And by the way, so much of what I'm going to say you've already heard today, but never mind. And then people will take responsibility for themselves, and whoever doesn't deserves whatever happens to them. So everybody here has a responsibility to say that this is wrong and to say what is right. Next year, not only all the things that Marion talked about this morning in terms of the achievements of civil rights, because that was a movement, and the lives that were taken in all of that, but it's the 50th anniversary year of the War on Poverty. And as sure as we're sitting here, Paul Ryan, much mentioned today, and here I go, and I'm not talking about the history of Republicans who supported these things over the decades. Food stamps was a bipartisan program until really just 2 years ago. Richard Nixon was the first president who ever sent a message to Congress asking that we have a national food stamp program. Bob Dole saved the food stamp program in the early 1980s. The most recent President Bush had a Deputy Secretary, Eric Bost, who believed very strongly, and indeed, when the food stamp program was reauthorized in 2003, under that President Bush's leadership, they actually rescinded cuts that had been put into the program during the Clinton administration. So when I talk about Paul Ryan, and somebody mentioned Newt Gingrich, they all do say that they're in favor of reducing poverty. Of course. Although sometimes not so clear that they even would say that. But anyway, they do. And so they're saying already that the war on poverty was a failure. We did it wrong. And we have to be ready, and we have to speak out. We need that new movement that Marion talked about this morning, and we need to speak out. We need to say the facts about the 60s when we supposedly embarked on such a disastrous path. We need to say that in the 1960s, poverty in this country was reduced, was cut in half, from 22% in 1959 to 11% in 1973. African American poverty was reduced from 55% in our country in 1959 to 31%, still too high, but what an achievement. We have to say Medicaid, not only the recent efforts, the recent enactment of the tremendous expansion of Medicaid, which is of historic significance, but look at what's happened to infant mortality in this country and to a number of other health indicators since 1965 when Medicaid was enacted. We have to say that is good, that is an achievement, we have to protect it. It's going to be, the next chapter is going to be a help to millions of people. Covered California is on the way. I was so glad to hear all of that. You obviously have your bumps and so on, but this is historic. And we need to talk about food stamps. I went to Mississippi with Robert Kennedy in 1967. By the way, that's when I met my wife. So maybe I'll stop right there. But the fact is, and it was terrible, the fact is that we saw, because she was our guide and she wanted the senators to see it, children in our country with bloated bellies and with sores that would not heal on their arms and their legs. That's not true in America anymore. We have the terrible poverty that we're here to talk about today, but you will not see that. You will see food inadequacy, people whose food stamps run out, no question, but not that kind of deepest poverty that we saw then. And at the same time, we need to understand that there are now 6 million people in this country whose only income is from food stamps. Something wrong with that. Yes, the vast majority of people who are on food stamps are working, and it is bizarre to say that that's somebody who's lazy and wants to live on the public dole. They're working as hard as they can and don't earn enough to make ends meet. But it's also true that at the other end, because of what we did to the much maligned cash assistance program welfare and turned it into temporary assistance for needy families, and we needed to reform welfare. 6 million people have only the income that they get from food stamps. And what is happening now? Well, we all know, we've heard about it today, we know about it anyway, that it is no longer bipartisan, or at least most of people in that part of the political spectrum want to cut it deeply, really get rid of it. We have to say that is wrong. The threat is real, and we have to be strong. But still, there are 46 million people in poverty. Why is that? That's a fact. It's a terrible fact. So let's go back to 1968. Even with the devastating losses of Dr. King and Robert Kennedy that year, the prospects for further progress on poverty, as I said, were good. We were on the way to cutting poverty in half. So what happened? What happened that we did not foresee? What happened that we still have 46 million people living in poverty? It's not what Paul Ryan says, the facts. What happened now? It's so important, and I think perhaps the thing that I can add to the conversation today is to understand that the problems that we're talking about here have been with us for a long period of time, and they are not the same as what we thought we were dealing with in 1968. Number one, first and foremost, we've talked about it today, the flood of low-wage jobs, globalization, technology, union busting. We didn't foresee this if we were sitting there in 1968. But now, 106 million people in our country, a third of our population, have incomes that are below twice the poverty line, below $38,000 for a family of three. That's a big number, 106 million people. That half the jobs in this country, national number, pay less than $34,000 a year, and a quarter of them pay less than the poverty line for a family of four. So, of course, this is about child poverty, because it's the parents who are earning the money and not enough money. I would say to you, I think we would agree, it's the biggest single factor in the size of the number of people who are in poverty in this country. It will make a significant difference to see the things that are beginning to happen now. The raising of the minimum wage here in California, that's a signal for the nation. That's not good, only good for Californians. But at the same time, it's only the beginning, and we need to be clear about that. Senate President Steinberg talked about the fact that we have to look at the other side of the equation about getting people ready for the jobs of the 21st century, with which I wholly agree, but about the wages themselves. Wage theft, we heard about that. The high cost of poverty, paid sick leave, wage disparity for women, unions, much, much more. If we, with First Five in California, make a major, major difference in child care, that creates jobs. And of course, we want those jobs that pay enough to live on. Nationally, as you know, child care workers actually get paid less than the poverty line for a family of three. That's a challenge. But also, we want to have those jobs go proportionately to people who are among those who are disproportionately unemployed now. The Affordable Care Act is going to create new jobs. If we had a decent affordable housing initiative in this country, that would create new jobs for people. It's not just about infrastructure. It's about meeting our national needs and, of course, financing them. Dealing with the revenue side that's involved that has to be met if we're going to do those things. So jobs, you know, every politician talks about jobs, but what's the content? How are we going to make that happen? Not so easy. We have to say what needs to be done, and we have to work for it. Now next, and very connected to the issue of who is poor in this country and why so many more people, are the changes that have taken place in family structure in our country. So many more single moms. That's a worldwide thing that cuts across racial lines, but it's also an issue in the minority communities. And the children of those single moms are the largest single poverty group in the country, well over 40%. Why? Because only one breadwinner is possible, and we just didn't foresee this. It's the next thing we didn't foresee. So many things that we have to do to strengthen families as well as to raise wages. in order to connect those two things. Thirdly, we did not foresee the decline of public education. We've responded really much too quickly to that, but the decline really begins in the 1970s when, ironically, more women were able to go and do other kinds of things, had other professional choices, but much more went into the decline. We've got to be clear that we both have to have high-quality public schools and we have to fight poverty. We need both of those things to make progress. And I just want to underline, I would say a lot more about it, but what President Pro Tem Steinberg said is that what we need to do with our high schools is to make it possible for our young people, all of our young people, wherever they live, to be qualified, to be skilled, to be able to get the jobs of the 21st century that do give an income that one can live on. Fourth, we didn't foresee the intensification of concentrated poverty. Not just the white flight in the 70s, black flight. And this is the challenge of persistent and intergenerational poverty. This is the story of people stuck in place where children end up even worse off than their parents. This, I believe, is our greatest failure of public policy and failure as a set of communities to deal with this. What Bob Ross told us this morning about his experience in New Jersey. We need regional strategies as well as neighborhood revitalization, totally three-dimensional strategies. Fifth, we didn't foresee that we would lock up people, especially men of color, at a prodigious rate, and so connected to the issues of place. And we're beginning to act, but we have a long way to go. Sixth, I'm looking at zeros on this thing here, but I'm going faster. Sixth, we did not foresee what would happen, and I've already talked about this, about the other end, deep poverty. We now have 20 million people by the census, 15 million under the supplemental poverty measure of people who have incomes below half the poverty line, below $19,000 for a family of three. Cash assistance is gone in most of the country. You may not be quite that clear about that in California because you have been, at least relatively speaking, maintained, at least in the number of people who receive TANF, better than most states. By the way, I want to say about the 50%, we've heard this a couple times and it's in the research paper today, that 50% of the Californians who qualify get food stamps. You should know that you're one of the bottom 3 or 4 states in the country in that. So the 50%, you need to know that number. Maybe, people said, oh, 50%. There are a number of states that have over 90% of the people who are qualified for food stamps are receiving. That's a real challenge for people of California. The next thing we did not foresee is the persistent animus that exists about race and about gender in our politics as they relate to poverty. We know that we've made great strides in this country in those areas. We know that. But the intersection of race and poverty remains the most dangerous intersection in our country. And finally, inequality. President gave a speech, very good, very pleased. But remember, these issues are not just about a disparity at the top. We need attention at the bottom, too. And I know the president said that, and of course I'm glad he did. I'm not surprised that he did. But when they talk about inequality, we have to say, pay attention to the whole bottom 99%, all the way to the bottom. That's why we're all here today. But we all have to keep at the messages every day. It's a very different message from what we're hearing from the Paul Ryans of this world. Public policies work. Revenues are needed to finance those public policies. Revenues should come fairly from everybody in this country, from corporate and wealthy individuals. We need those revenues. But we won't get better child care. We won't get better schools. We won't get better pathways to jobs for all unless we take the money that's put in from public sources and we use our civic responsibility to make those things work at the local level around the country. So public money and public policy are essential on all these matters, but they won't do the job by themselves. We need the leadership in this room on every part of the challenge, every part of it, and including the responsibility for letting everybody in this country know in the strongest possible words that these policies have worked, that public policy has this role to play. We shouldn't have to say this. We should not have to say this. But we need to. There's a lot of money coming from another place and another set of places to muddy the water, to pollute the air. And it's our responsibility to get a message to America that we not only need to do something about the problems that we face, but that we know how to do things, that we have done things, that there would be 86 million people in poverty instead of the 46 million that there are right now if we had not done what we have done. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say many things, wrote long books. But one thing that he said that sticks with me always, before the days of Twitter, he said, "We're not all guilty, but we're all responsible." Thank you.